Good afternoon. Welcome to the February 3rd meeting of the Rotary Club of Des Moines. I am President Catherine Staub, and it's wonderful to see you all here today. I'm glad you braved the cold. Claudia Shavel, thank you for signing up. She's going to give us a moment of inspiration, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance and the four-way test. Claudia?
Thank you, President Catherine. It's a pleasure to share a moment of inspiration with my fellow Rotarians today. Today, even though we have frigid temperatures outside, there's plenty to be celebrating. We want to celebrate Lunar New Year and Black History Month in February. Lunar New Year is one of the most important celebrations of the year among East and Southeast Asian cultures, including Chinese, Vietnamese, and Korean communities, among others. Tied to the lunar calendar, the holiday began as a time for feasting and to honor household and deities as well as ancestors. It typically begins in the first new moon that occurs between the end of January and spans the first 15 days of the first month of the lunar calendar. This multi-day holiday is celebrated by more than 1.5 billion people around the world. And this is pretty traditional, not only in cultures outside of the US, but also for Asian Americans. Every Lunar New Year corresponds to an animal from the Chinese zodiac, which consists of 12 animals. And this year is the year of the tiger, symbolizing strength, braveness, and growth, which we can all use some of. Black History Month is an annual celebration of achievements by African Americans and a time for recognizing their central role in U.S. history. The story of Black History Month begins in 1915, half a century after the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in the United States. And that September, a historian called Carter G. Woodson and the prominent minister Jesse Moreland founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, an organization dedicated to researching and promoting achievements by Black Americans and other people of African descent. The Black History Month of 2022 theme is Black Health and Wellness, which explores the legacy of not only Black scholars and medical practitioners in Western medicine. Now join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now the four-way test.
Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Now, your contactless greetings.
I did bring my.
Gosh, this looks like a whole different crowd. Well, that's good. Yeah. I'm blanking on her name. I'll go back. I will send them.
We welcome two guests today. We have Danny, who's a guest of Michael Woolnerman. Hello, Danny, welcome. And Austin, guest of Paul Purpose. Hello, Austin, welcome. And their full names and affiliations are on the PowerPoint screen. Today is the last day to sign up for President-elect Matt Busick's February Fling on February 17th at the Iowa Tap Room. If you have not yet either accepted or declined the invitation, you should have received another email reminder yesterday. So again, today is the last day. You must register yourself if you want to attend, and if you want to bring any guests, you must also register them by today. The Rotary Club of Des Moines Hiking Fellowship. Yay, Denise and Catherine. We have an outing scheduled for Saturday, March 5th at 11 a.m. The plan is to go snowshoeing, but you know, Iowa, I don't know, it may be balmy, it may be snowy, it may be icy, whatever. We will have fun regardless. We are meeting at Captain Roy's, and the reason for that is you can rent snowshoes there for $5, or you can bring your own, or you can wear hiking boots, or if it's like 70 degrees, wear your running shoes or hiking boots, whatever. Nonetheless, join us. If you want to RSVP, if you want to join us, please RSVP to Denise so we know that you're coming. So if you're running a couple minutes late, the group waits for you. Our Rotary Youth Exchange Committee is accepting applications for RILA. And sadly, none of us in the room are qualified to attend RILA because it is for youth. However, you may have a beloved child, grandchild, or other young person who you mentor, and we would love for you to encourage them to apply to attend. The program is from July 17th through 22nd at Grinnell College. There is an application process. The applications are due April 30th. It is a life-changing, fun, and energizing leadership development experience. There's more information. There are printouts out on the table, but there's also going to be more information about that in Tuesday's bulletin. Our club has allocated funds to send 4 youth to that. We cover all expenses for the 4 who are selected to attend on behalf of our club. And priority is given to relatives of Rotary Club of Des Moines members. And now, Graham Gillette is going to introduce our program. Graham?
Hey everybody. I'm going to key off Claudia's words of inspiration a little bit. I mean, she was talking about how much we have to be thankful for and grateful for in this country. And you know, as we look out the windows of Des Moines, and you know, we're fortunate to meet up here at the Rouen building, we can see all the things in Des Moines that we're proud as a community to have built. And there are so many of them that make Des Moines unique. You know, as we walk down a Des Moines street, it may lack the thrum of New York or that insistence of Chicago to be something bigger, but Des Moines always does things very well when our people decide to do something. In the Botanical Garden back in its day, the Botanical Center is one of those things. Polly Moore and a bunch of people in Des Moines had this idea to build a garden in Des Moines. They didn't think a city could be a city without a garden. They were kind of right. And they didn't stop for quite a while until they had the dollars and they built that dome that you can just see out the window. And I think Kim will tell you, what did it go? 1977, I think, was the year they topped that dome.
When they broke ground.
That's when they broke ground, 1977. It was a very successful institution, and you know, sometime along that way, the city of Des Moines operated it. They had some financial issues at the city. They asked Des Moines Waterworks to step in to manage it for a period of time. Which was an interesting thing. It's not exactly in the mission of water utility to manage a garden like that. Probably if I would have been on the board at the time, I would have voted against it. It's outside of the mission. I'm on the board now. What's unique about that, I think, that partnership was because Des Moines Waterworks operated it and was kind of that keeper of the time. Along came another group of people just a few years ago. Fred White, Janice Rouen, Buzz Brenton, Tom Urban, and others who saw the Botanical Center as could be something more than it was currently. And we were able at Des Moines Waterworks and as a community to hand over the reins to the now Greater Des Moines Botanical Garden. And if you haven't been there recently, it has really become something much bigger and larger and exciting than I think even Polly Moore imagined in in the late 1970s. It's a place of, we were talking with Catherine about it, a place of education, a place of relaxation. There are events there. And I was laughing recently about the number of people who walk into the Botanical Garden unannounced to get married there. They just show up day of to get married, which I guess is a kind of a sign of our times, but it's that kind of a gathering place in Des Moines. And so what's bloomed at the Botanical Center on that piece of ground by the river that was an ignored piece of ground in the 70s was something remarkable. What's come as recently, both expanding the outside garden, the Botanical Garden has taken over management of the Asian garden that's down the street. We continue to have a great, and will continue for the into the future to have a relationship with the Des Moines Waterworks, connecting our park and the garden and the science center and everything else. It's really something remarkable. So I'm going to introduce, and it's my pleasure to introduce Kim Perez. She joined us at the garden last year, midway through the year as a CEO, and she comes back to Iowa. She's an Iowa girl. She graduated from the University of Iowa. She has a master's degree in social work from Loyola University in Chicago. Before coming to the Greater Des Moines Botanical Garden, she was CEO of The Cradle, which is one of the nation's leading adoption agencies. And before that, she was executive director of the People's Resource Center, a not-for-profit focusing on assisting low-income families. Her background is an interesting one, and you'll notice she doesn't have a horticulture background. What we brought to Des Moines was somebody who's dynamic, can connect people, and can help us grow into what we're going to become. And so I can't tell, I'm excited about Kim Perez's leadership, and I'm very pleased to introduce you to Rotary.
Thank you, Graham. Both Graham and Claudia serve on the Gardens board, so kind of serendipitous, or perhaps planned, that both of you are up at this podium today. Thank you all so much for having me here. I'm absolutely thrilled. It's also it's a happy coincidence, perhaps, that I've met some of you already. I have only lived in Des Moines for a little while, and so meeting new people is kind of my priority these days. So I'm going to tell you my story today, how I got here, but I'm also going to talk about, and Graham teed this up so well, the Botanical Center becoming the Botanical Garden, and then looking a little bit ahead. Everything that you see on the screen is mostly going to be scenery, so all of the photos that you see are photos from the garden. If you haven't been there to see it live and in person, I hope that you'll consider coming and joining us. Okay, so my story. I am a native Iowan. I grew up in the Quad Cities. Spent 4 years in Iowa City, as Graham said, and then moved straight to Chicago. I knew that I wanted to work with children and families. That was what I set out to do. Didn't know what I was going to get my master's degree in, so I went to Chicago and I started working in child welfare. Literally in downtown Chicago, and I did foster care work for several years. And for a girl from the Quad Cities, doing foster care work in the city of Chicago was an awakening to the realities of the world that I had never experienced. So my eyes were opened significantly, very quickly, and after doing that work for a little while, I decided that social work was my future. So I joined the program at Loyola University in Chicago, thinking that I was going to go into family therapy. I wanted to work with kids, I wanted to work with families. I wanted to create the environment that I grew up in, right? My parents are still married, very happily. I just had kind of that idyllic childhood and a lot of really positive experiences. I was given opportunities that most people I learned when I moved to Chicago were not privileged enough to have. In any case, I was working full-time, going to school part-time to get my master's. I found myself doing work in nonprofits focused on quality improvement. How do we do what we do, learning from it, and then learn how to do it better. Essentially, that's quality improvement, right? Lean Six, those kinds of things. Learned a lot of things around the importance of public-private partnerships, how the public sector and the private sector can be really powerful when working together for a similar mission. And was on a path to keep doing that work, and then suddenly I got a call from my then supervisor, who was the vice president of Child and Family Services, and she said, I'm going to be out for an extended medical leave, and I've recommended to the CEO that you take over. You start Monday. And so, hello, suddenly I am on a completely different career path, career trajectory, and found myself as an executive. And lo and behold, found out that I liked it. Found out that I know how to fundraise. Found out that all the things I learned as a social worker translate into managing people, into building relationships, into the kinds of work that needs to be done in a community, in a nonprofit. And so I've been doing that work ever since. I became the executive director of People's Resource Center, as Graham mentioned, doing work for people living at or near poverty in DuPage County, Illinois, which is the wealthiest county in the state of Illinois, and learned a lot about engaging community members in the work of the organization. At that point in my career, it was a 40-member staff with 1,300 volunteers doing all of the day-to-day work, stocking the shelves of the food pantries, all of that, right? That became part of what I needed to create in my career because there was so much excitement and innovation coming out of those groups of volunteers. And so that led me to the Cradle. I was recruited to go and be the CEO of the Cradle, pulling my child welfare experience together, as well as some of my nonprofit experience as well. And in that setting, I understood from a whole different lens the business aspect of running a nonprofit. The Cradle was a very challenged organization financially. You know, as an adoption agency, it's a very complicated set of realities when you're serving those populations. And so a lot of complicated conversations around the reality of a business model that needed supply and demand, but you're talking about families and children and things. It's a very complicated kind of thing. In any case, spent about 5 years doing that work. And then I got a call from a recruiter, and she asked me if I would talk to her about a position in Des Moines, and I thought it was really around networking, right? Who do you know? Hey, I know you've got roots in Iowa. And she said, no, I'm interested in talking to you about this job at the Botanical Garden. And, you know, I thought, well, I don't think you realize who you're talking to because I don't know anything about plants. And I told her that very clearly. I do okay with houseplants, so that's about the extent of it. And she said, actually, the board of directors at the Botanical Garden in Des Moines is interested in elevating the mission of the garden to be something that is focused on community building and community engagement and taking its mission to a different level. And they've got people who know about the plants. They've got people who teach the classes, right? That's not what they need in their next leader. And I said, well, yes, I have roots in Iowa. Yes, that's an interesting conversation. And I guess the rest is history. I started at the garden at the end of April, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be living up to, hopefully, the expectation of community engagement that the board set. And I'm going to get back to that in a little bit. So in terms of the then and the now, I'm not sure my clicker is working anymore. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay, so we began construction of the then Botanical Center in 1977. It opened in 1979. The dome was the first physical component built. In fact, our history goes back to the 1920s when some of the local garden clubs started imagining bringing together a public garden in the Des Moines area. And there were a lot of false starts, especially through the 50s and 60s. The Friends of the Des Moines Botanical Center was formed in 1969, and so 10 years later to have this dome come to be was a pretty significant accomplishment. So 2 years after construction, a truckload of tropical plants from Pennsylvania, Longwood Gardens, if anyone has been there and visited, came and filled up that dome, and many of those plants are still thriving today. It was officially opened on December 15th of 1979 under the umbrella of the City of Des Moines Parks and Rec. In fact, Parks and Rec still has an active presence. Ben Page represents the Parks and Rec department on our board as well. So that public-private partnership really exists very strongly still. So the city continued, as Graham mentioned earlier, the city continued to operate the garden, the then Botanical Center, for a couple of decades, and then in 2003, Des Moines Waterworks took over the day-to-day management. And then during this period of time under the umbrella of Waterworks, those 4 community leaders, Buzz Brenton, Tom Urban, Fred Weitz, Janice Rouen, decided that, you know, it could be more, that Des Moines was growing, Des Moines needed a different kind of botanical garden, and so they set out to advance the organization forward. So in May of 2011, we actually became a standalone nonprofit, separate from the city, separate from Des Moines Waterworks, and it resulted in some expansion into outdoor gardens. It resulted in the closure of Robert D. Ray Drive, as many of you probably recall, and so through this transition, you know, I think a lot has changed. I'm curious, how many of you still refer to the Botanical Garden as the Botanical Center? I hear every single day. I mean, I think that speaks to the community engagement, how many people have been around for as long as it has been. The significant difference really is that partnership change. I'm not sure that I'm doing this right. There it is. But today's Botanical Garden represents 17 acres, 10 of which are built outdoor gardens and indoor gardens, combination of free access and public access spaces, as well as admission-based spaces. And our plant collections represent species and cultivars from locations across the globe. One of the things that I've been taught by the plant experts since I've been a part of the team at the garden is that gardens follow a relatively predictable pattern. They start off sleeping, and then they creep, they grow a little bit, and you see a little bit of change, and then suddenly they leap. Sleep, creep, leap. That's what gardens do. So I would say, as a botanical garden, we are entering a leaping phase without question. So from a community engagement perspective, the reason that I joined the garden and brought my family from Chicago and started our life in a whole new way is because being a part of this community at this really exciting time, I think, offers a lot of opportunity. We're ready to leap in countless ways, and we're focused on engaging incredibly deeply and meaningfully within the community, finding all kinds of ways that we can find the connections between plants and whatever else. Plants and people, plants and all the other parts of our life, which I'll try and bring to life for you in a moment. So, just by way of example, plants and families, plants and children are part of what we're doing now. These cute kiddos came and spent a day with us over winter break, and you may not know, we actually have a science lab at the Botanical Garden, and they came and learned about how to identify different parts of plants, and they got to wear the lab coats and use the microscopes and wear the goggles and all kinds of things like that. We're doing really cool summer camps, but engaging families and kids of all ages, trying to help them to find a connection to things that grow. We're also going out into the community, into schools. So we've got a new program that we call the Plant Pet program, where we're giving classrooms plants instead of a pet, right? It's their plant pet that they can take care of, they learn about, and then at the end of the school year, those classrooms will come to the Botanical Garden for a free field trip to experience the garden after having learned about taking care of a plant themselves. So some new and different things that we're doing. Plants and kids. Plants and warmth. Sounds good today, right? Plants and friends. So every Friday through the winter, actually we go through the end of February, I think, with this program. Dome After Dark is a really cool way to experience the garden. Normally our public hours are until 5 p.m. and so experiencing the conservatory after dark doesn't happen except for that short period of time when it gets dark at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or something ridiculous. But we're doing some really cool things that invite local arts and culture leaders, or excuse me, organizations to come in and share what they do. It could be the ballet, it could be music, it could be any of those kinds of things, and Dome After Dark is one of the vehicles that we found to do that, and it's just a really cool experience. Plants and music, plants and health, or plants and wellness, those are things that we're also doing. So every Saturday this winter, we're doing Tai Chi in the conservatory, so plants and wellness. We've got really cool music series going on. Again, we're trying to find ways. Yes, we're a garden. Yes, our mission is focused on plants, but that's not the only thing that we want to offer. We want to be, and I think believe that we should be, a place to add value to the experience of being in Des Moines. We want to be a tool for recruitment and retention for local businesses, right? We want to help you attract your next leaders. And so finding diverse ways to engage with the local community is part of what we're trying to do with these opportunities. Oh, there we go. We have also, as Graham mentioned, this fall we assumed stewardship of the Robert D. Ray Asian Garden, something that we take incredibly seriously. That legacy of that garden and the stories that are told through that garden and in memory of the work that Governor Ray did are important stories for our community to know, to celebrate, and frankly to replicate in as many ways as we can. So finding ways for us to create more of those plants and people connections, we want to be able to do that. The other photo here is the Rouen Reflection Garden that opened in August of 2020. How many of you have been to the garden to experience any of the outdoor space? The Rouen Reflection Garden, I still, every time people are outside, hear people say, I had no idea that the garden went this far north. There's some really cool spaces out there to experience. It's a great place in the spring to bring your laptop and do a little work instead of work from home, just a thought. You could do that in the dome too. The balcony has great Wi-Fi. Anyway, as we look into the future, we've got 2 new garden spaces opening in May of 2022. This amazing piece of art is called Threshold. It is a memorial to Tom Urban and his leadership to bring the garden to what it is today. It is housed in what will be the Founder's Garden. And the Founder's Garden is a native Iowa dry meadow. So we are honoring native plants. We are also trying to highlight plants that are drought tolerant. So plants and art, plants and sustainability. These are part of our messages that we're trying to bring to life through some of these gardens and some of what we're doing in the future. So this is Threshold the day after it was installed. But over the next decade, we'll be expanding our outdoor garden space for another 6 acres to the north, all the way up to University. We've got a lot of big plans. We expect to really activate the riverfront along the John Pat Dorian Trail. But in addition, we also expect that you'll see our mission more out in the community than you have in the past. And we're so excited about these opportunities to engage more deeply in the community. It's why I came to the garden. It's what I'm passionate about. And as we continue to bring our mission to life, exploring, explaining, and celebrating the world of plants, we want to continue to find all the ands that follow, plants and everything else. Thank you for letting me come and share my story, our story. I'm so happy to be here and would happily address any questions if there are any. Denise.
I would love to have a Rotary event at the Botanical Garden.
I would love that too. Let's make it happen. Let's do it. Yes, sir.
Yes. I have 2 questions.
Yes, 2 questions.
First one is related to funding. How are you financed? How are you supported today? How does that work? Second question, you had the kids in the picture earlier on, and you talked about what was it, plant pet thing?
The Plant Pet program.
I'm just curious, did the plants live?
All right, I'm going to tackle that one first. Actually, during my interview process to become the CEO, I actually was asked about one of my first memories of gardens and plants and things like that. And the first thing that occurred to me was the trauma that everyone experiences when they get a plant and take it home, and then it croaks a week later or something like that. I'm told that horticulturists kill plants every day, that plants die every day, and that's part of the normal experience, so we shouldn't feel pressure by that. So if the kids are not successful in keeping their plants alive, there's a lesson there too, right? Anyway, in terms of our funding, we are really a true public-private partnership. We have earned revenue streams, we have philanthropic support, and we have ongoing public support from the city of Des Moines and some sunsetting agreements that speak to the legacy of how we've been funded in the past when under the umbrella of those public organizations. So I would say within the next several years, one of our priorities is to move further away from any of those public funding sources and more significantly into earned and contributed revenue, which truly make up the lion's share. More than 85% of our budget would be either earned or contributed revenue from a philanthropic perspective. Hope that answers your question. We're at about a $3 million budget right now. I expect that will continue to grow each year. It's about $400,000 bigger than it was the year before. Yes, right here.
With the completion of the reflection garden and the installation of threshold underway, what's next for expansion for the garden?
Well, from an expansion perspective, we've got a couple of priorities. One is, the dome and some of the kind of original building from 1979 needs some attention. So we're gonna do a little bit of refurbishment, if you will, on some of our existing assets. As probably the most timely of those priorities, happening sooner rather than later. In terms of future physical expansion and adding to those additional 6 acres to make up a full 17-acre garden, we have plans for a Riverfront Cafe right along the John Pat Dorian Trail. We have plans for, so the trajectory of the land is that it becomes a little hillier as we move north. The land goes up, we want it to go up, so we've got plans for a canopy walk up through the trees, a tree house for cool events and corporate meetings, and some things like edible gardens and a very small amphitheater along the hillside that will overlook the river, some very cool things like that. I'll say all that within the next decade, more specifics TBD.
That's great.
Yes, sir.
So over the past couple years, when everybody was home, houseplants had their time to shine. Influencers that now make money just on houseplants. I know our collection grew by at least 15 over the source of the pandemic. Do you guys offer programming for people that maybe get excited about those plants but don't always keep them alive?
We actually do. I'm not certain of the date. It might even be this weekend. We're doing a really cool houseplant hike within the garden to highlight the plants that are in the garden that are really traditionally houseplants. If you haven't visited our Gardener Show House, that's actually one of the ways that we bring to life a lot of different ways to engage with houseplants. It's one of the original 3 production greenhouses that was built when the original construction was done, and that greenhouse has been transformed. Actually, that began under the leadership of the Des Moines Waterworks when the garden was under their leadership. But the Gardener Show House is really an intended view of what you can do and how you can get artistic and creative with houseplants. One example, you saw a photo perhaps earlier, we've got a train set up in the winter, and that's in the Gardener Show House, and it's all houseplants that are creating the setting for that that train. So a few examples that way. Check our website though for that houseplant hike. It's actually pretty fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Yes, Denise.
Also on Saturday mornings, they have 2 classes, 10:30 and 11:30, on a variety of different topics. So you can, I think they're like $5 or $6, $7.
Through the end of March,
Through the
learn
end
on
of March.
Saturdays. Yep, and those are also offered virtually.
Cool.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So Kim, thank you for presenting today. It's very interesting. I think with your mission, you would make an excellent Rotarian.
You're actually
Yes.
the 3rd person that suggested that today. 4th?
Excellent.
Yes.
I'm glad to know that. You know we would welcome.
Thank you.
My question is, are there professional organizations that certify or have credentialing facilities for these types of botanical gardens across the country? And if so, what's your affiliation with them?
We are a member of a few of those organizations. The American Public Garden Association is one of those. We're active members. It's your traditional kind of membership organization, conferences, lots of education, things like that. We're part of other horticulture societies as well, and we're also part of under some or multiple of those memberships. We're also part of reciprocal membership programs. So as a member of the botanical garden, you can benefit from reciprocal membership to almost 300 or more other public gardens across the country at no other charge. Yep. And then the local public gardens, the Iowa Arboretum, the Brenton Arboretum, as well as Ryman Gardens, the 4 of us, even though we don't officially, I think there's a 90-mile radius on that reciprocal membership admission benefit, but the 4 of us work really closely together. So the 4 heads of those local central Iowa public gardens, we get together once a quarter or so to try to make sure that we're working together as much as possible. I think there was another question.
Yeah, you kind of touched on some of the community outreach that's done through classroom programs, but given your background, I was curious about how else the garden makes itself accessible to all members of the community.
Well, I would say it's partially a work in progress, because part of what I'm doing a lot of, including today, is saying, hey, we'd love to be around the table, invite us, and let's see what happens. We are part of Museums for All, which is a program that makes admission into the garden free for anyone who has an EBT card. Essentially, any household that qualifies for free and reduced lunch would be able to access the garden at no charge. We have a few other programs that we've recently just started, community memberships that some local nonprofits have purchased. There are some examples of folks from senior living facilities who have been coming to visit the garden on and experience sensory tours. So they might not see as well as they have been able to, or hear as well as they've been able to, but we're creating these tours so that they can experience the other senses available to them at the garden. So those are a few examples. But I would say we've got a lot in the works when it comes to that. We're having conversations about how can we be a good partner to other local organizations? Can we help with some workforce development priorities? Having conversations with other organizational leaders like Melissa O'Neill at Central Iowa Shelter and Service, and Oak Ridge Community, Oak Ridge, and just a lot of different conversations like that. So I would say if I came back and talked to you guys a year from now, I'd give you a lot more examples, because we're actively trying to build that up. So if you've got ideas, call me. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to piggyback on that, because we have the adventure pass through the library, where families can go to once a year. Family of 4 can go visit the Botanical Center for free. So you guys are great partners. So
Thank you, I'm glad. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that you were with others in a 90-mile or 90-minute radius. Who are the other public gardens that you would consider as partners or folks that you were interacting with?
The local Central Iowa gardens are Ryman Gardens, us, the Brenton Arboretum, and the Iowa Arboretum. So those are the 4 organizations in central Iowa only. Now, you know, aside from that, I've been in touch with the Quad City Botanical Garden leader. Denise actually went and visited and sent us a bunch of pictures, and, you know, so there are lots of those relationships to build and to strengthen outside of just those 4, but those are the big ones in central Iowa. Yes?
This may have been asked, I can't hear all the questions back here, but I'm curious as to what you do to make sure that the outdoor plants survive the freezing Iowa winter, which today is not totally atypical. I assume much of that is as to the type of plant they are.
There's a lot of work that goes into that. I would say, you know, part of it is, it boils down to plant selection. We do not plant plants outdoors that will need to overwinter, that will not survive. So generally speaking, that limits some of our plant selections that are year-round in the garden. We also do a lot of change-outs. So we do annual beds and we do perennial beds, and all of those are designed annually by our horticulture staff and are changed out periodically. And so you see some of that through plants that thrive in the heat. So they're gonna be great in July, but they're not obviously gonna overwinter. So in some ways, I would say it's also, let's be honest, some trial and error. You know, depending on soil, depending on water, depending on sunlight, all of those variables play into, can you tell I've learned a lot already? Play into what plants survive and what plants thrive. And so there's a little bit of trial and error. And what I've also learned is that some plants that do well in the Wells Fargo Rose Garden at the Botanical Garden will not do as well on the Belvedere because differences in sunlight and soil and all of those things. A little trial and error.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Sorry, they were trying to sidebar conversation about some botanical garden swag. So anyway, Kim, thank you so much for your presentation today. Thank you for moving the garden into more community engagement. For those of you who have not been there, I highly recommend going. It is a definite treat, especially on a really cold but sunny day. That upper balcony is like the most beautiful place to work or read a book. Love it. Speaking of books, we are donating a book in Kim's honor through our Rotary Rosie Reader Van, which is through the Des Moines Public Library Foundation. And as you all recall, our club donated $40,000 to purchase the van through our community grant program. Upcoming meetings here at the Embassy Club. Please think about somebody you know who would be interested and invite them to attend, or simply ask a prospective member. We are a fabulous club. We are only a strong club through membership, so we need everybody to be inviting new members. We have 4 of us inviting Kim. Anyway, on February 10th, we have Warren Erickson, president of AE Dairy. February 17th is the Fling, so we will not have a lunch meeting, but we will, if you RSVP by today, or if you already have, be having fun and fellowship at our February Fling at the Iowa Tap Room. And then on February 24th, ooh, I did not practice this last name, Ted Comanches, U.S. Marshal, Southern District of Iowa. So with that, thank you so much for being here today, braving the cold weather, hearing about the lovely warm garden. We are delighted that you are part of Rotary Club of Des Moines. If you are visiting us today, a couple of you, we hope that you become permanent members so you can be here every week. With that, we are adjourned.
Was it CALSA with the county?
Yes, that's what it was. That's what it was.
Do that.
Yeah.